Hey everybody. So I decided to do try out this new streaming thing on Facebook that I just found out. So I'm gonna wait for some people to come in and kind of hear. Today I have my cousin with me, Zaniel Young. Zaniel is the pastor of uh, Wesley AME Zion Church. He's been in there since 2001. Um, Served as a member of the ministerial staff, director of youth and prison ministry evangelism under the late Reverend Dr. Calvert, until he was called to serve as the founding pastor of Deliverance Temple AME Zion Church in Burlington, New Jersey. He serves, Burlington, New Jersey, where he serves until August of 2014, subsequently being appointed by Bishop Lewis Hunter Sr., the pastor of the historic Shrewsbury Avenue AME Zion Church, Red Bank, New Jersey. Reverend Young is the 2011 and 2012 recipient of Cisco Sherador Scholarship Foundation's Humanitarian Award for Educational Excellence, Youth Enrichment, and Community Involvement. Reverend Young has an associate's degree in criminal justice, bachelor's of social work, and as he's a licensed social worker, respectively, and is currently enrolled in a MDiv program. At the 145th session of the New Jersey Annual Conference, Reverend Young was appointed by Bishop Dennis V. Proctor to return home and pastor the Wesley AME Zion Church in Burlington, New Jersey. Reverend Young is a firm believer that faith without work is dead. To that end, believe God and trust him for only what you do for him will last. All right. And so I just want to kind of bring in Pastor Zaniel Young. This is personal for me because he's actually my family member. He's my cousin too. And so I kind of wanted to talk to him about, his feelings of how the situation is going, that we're going through this pandemic right now, and how it's adjusting in church. And then we'll talk a little bit about politics and this race that's happening and trying to see, where his head is and what he thinks is happening so far in our country. So welcome, Zan.
Hey, good evening to you and to your listening audience. It's a pleasure to be here, and I guess in such a formal capacity, since our interactions are always so non-formal.
Yeah.
I'm honored and humbled that you would consider me as a voice of reason in such a really peculiar and unprecedented time.
Okay. So, Zan, I want you to tell me about what you do.
Well, I, of course, as you just told all of your listening audience and anyone who's dropped in or who just stopped scrolling on their feed to see this, you told them, of course, that I am the senior pastor, the proud senior pastor of what is my home church. In addition to that, I am bivocational, so I also work for for a network that deals with some of New Jersey's most vulnerable population of people, to include those with both mental health issues as well as developmental disabilities.
Okay. And you are the pastor of a pretty decent sized church. I mean, I know when we were working together at one point, you had Deliverance Temple and you were doing a startup church, and you've actually made it to a great space in Burlington, New Jersey. Tell me a little bit about your church.
From humble beginnings. I think, like you said, you have some personal attributes as you served as minister of music, and the many Sundays that we ministered to just a few people, to chairs, how we really pastored a community of people. We really just evangelized. We went out on foot. And so certainly God has enlarged our territory. But his word does promise and reassure us that he will bless us if we're faithful over a few things. He'll make us rule over many. And so certainly I'm grateful to God that out of my obedience and my faithfulness to him, he's now given us a larger responsibility. And so I take that on really seriously and humbly as well. But I'm proud to pastor the historic Wesley Church in the city of Burlington, New Jersey. It's conveniently located on Sunset Road. And while we're not there physically, we are still very much an active part of our community, even during a time such as now.
Okay. So I kind of want to dig into a couple of things. And so, you're going to have to just roll with me.
Okay.
Pastor, as we talk about different topics. But one of the first topics I want to kind of talk about is, as we're going through these times, this pandemic, right, where we're dealing with all of these things. Tell me a little bit about how your church is adjusting and what you've been doing in the community to try to make ends meet and kind of keep the ministry going.
Well, wow. Let me
I know
start.
that's not right.
Yeah. But let me say this before I could even start talking about some of the practical things that me myself has done, as well as my colleagues. I have to take a moment of personal privilege and salute, shout out, and just give a big round of applause, both physically and spiritually, to all of my colleagues. I think that some of us were in some way prepared to minister to a digital age or through a digital age, or we had in some way incorporated digital uh, footprints into our worship experience or into our ministry experience, but never at this capacity. And so I think that our faith leaders and pastors everywhere, have just done a phenomenal job at being resilient as well as being creative and utilizing some ingenuity and still being able to maintain connected with their congregations. And so, of course, some of the practical ways that my congregation has done that is we have, of course, been using digital platforms like this, like StreamYard, like Zoom, of
Yeah.
course, Skype. We have done some drive-bys. We have stayed connected through free conference calling. We've tried to use, I've had to put out the old-fashioned pen and paper and written some letters. I've sent out cards from home. I've made a few trips to the post office to get stamps and to mail stuff. So I think that we're exploring every option that we can in order to keep people connected and to continue to reach out and keep ministry moving.
I hear that. I know I was with you on, I believe, like last Sunday, when we were out there having people do a parade, and it was actually really cool. They were able to put scriptures and stuff on the car fronts and kind of still be able to be involved in the church. And I thought that was absolutely amazing thing. So, one of the things that I saw, you did a live earlier today about mental health. And so I think that, especially during these times when we're going through the pandemic, mental health is something that's very important. I know sometimes it may be a little bit taboo in certain communities, but I know that it's something that we really need to focus on, especially since we are starting to isolate ourselves and we can't really do active things like we did in our life before. You want to kind of talk about some of those things?
So I did. I'm glad you were watching earlier. Thank you for still supporting my ministry. And let me just say something to your listening audience that really means a lot. That family is important to us, but I don't know if it'll bless somebody who's listening that we do support each other. And so I'm glad that my cousin called it without hesitation. I didn't even have a script. My lighting isn't right, but I was like, absolutely, I'm all in. And so I thank you for jumping on earlier, but it was a really necessary conversation that the church has had, or we've been having, if you will, on a surface level. And I think that we've been trying to infuse what mental health looks like, trying to define it, and then trying to find our role in it as it relates to the church. And I think that now with the onset of COVID-19 and that with people sheltering in place, and with that comes a lot of other unresolved issues or issues that they have been coping with. So that really changes the dynamic of people's mental status. And then it necessitates for more mental health services. And
Yeah.
so as that need grows now at a rapid rate, we want to be ready for what's going to be a tsunami of needs post COVID-19. And so we want the church to be out in front of what that need is so that we're able to provide services more than just prayer and fasting. But that might be so, but we got to do more than just pray for people and tell them that God will fix it, because God will fix it, but he may use the therapist to do that through.
Yes, yes. And so, that's one of the things that I really like that you said on the thing. It's just like where, sometimes, when we have a lump, or if women have lumps on their breasts, they make sure they go in to the doctor and really get that checked out. And we need to do the same in our minds, where if, we have something wrong with our, or we feel like there is something bothering us intensely, that we go ahead and get that checked out with a doctor, and that, we can't just depend on friends and maybe the church, but we also have to seek professional help. How do you navigate that when you're talking to maybe some of the members of your community that you may be helping or supporting, or even parishioners in your church?
So that's a power pack question. And so
Yeah.
the way that I would start by answering that is by saying that, the stigma as it relates to mental health in the Black community is what differentiates Black mental health from mental health, right? And
Mhm.
so I'm an advocate and more of a social activist in the sense of Black mental health, because of course that affects the community of persons that I'm a part of, and that I most represent, right? So in Black mental health, what happens is that the stigma that is related to mental health issues prohibits us from being honest with the fact that we need help. And that comes from environmental factors. It comes from historical factors, like living through Jim Crow, living through the civil rights movement. And so that sense of, because our ancestors have lived through these things, and because we were cotton pickers and we have this big great strength, that we could be able to get through some things, right? But the
Yeah.
reality of it is that our ancestors and our parents, like your parents and my parents, they had unresolved issues, unresolved, undiagnosed mental health issues that had never been treated. And so they exacerbate from generation to generation. And the reality is that now millennials are employing the help of clinicians and therapists to work through those issues rather than to ignore them and to allow them to exacerbate and pass on to another generation. The issue that comes in, especially in African American communities, is that already African American communities, because of poverty, because of Jim Crow, because of violent and abusive backgrounds and environmental factors, were 20% more likely to be diagnosed with an issue relating to mental health, right? So
Hmm.
we're 20, out of that 20%, half of that 20% will actually go out and get services because of the stigma that relates to mental health, right? So we're trying to break the margin. So we want, if 20% of us are likely to become affected through mental health, then we want 20% of us to be able to access those services that we need. And so we really have to break the barriers of some of the cultural and environmental and historical things that have happened to us, and those factors that really add to our mental health, like what goes on in my house stays in my house, you know.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so we look at it as a sign of weakness, that there's something wrong with us, that we're a failure in a sense, the pressure that our family puts on us to perform,
Yeah.
to be the best that we can be. And so being able to verbalize that I have a deficiency in some way is hard for some.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, one of the things that I experienced as I got older is that I recognize that, we all have our issues that we've from the past. I, for one, was very blessed to have my mother there to raise me, and I knew of my father. But certain times when we go through things, we don't realize the baggage that we carry into our adult lives as we start to pursue relationships. And so, as we navigate those relationships, the goal is to make sure that once we come out of them, or once we go through them, that we don't just leave the relationship and not really reflect. You reflect on what's going on and how you can be a better person. So you move on to the next relationship, you actually have a kind of a template that you can go by and proceed to work on those things that you reflected on from the past relationship. I know that you probably, being a pastor, I know a lot of people pull on you for counseling and stuff like that. So how do you, or have you, or how would you counsel a couple that may be going through some things like in the home? Like, I mean, right now it's really kind of showing people who they really are. I mean, as we move through life and it's busy, sometimes we run into spaces of where we don't really have to deal with people because we get so set in a schedule. But now that we're going through this pandemic and these times, how do we navigate those relationships, and how do we have honest conversations and make sure that we're communicating with our spouses so that we can have successful relationships? So we can have successful relationships. I mean, I know that's a loaded question, but how are you counseling people? And how are you dealing with the parishioners with that?
Well, let me say this is that it's almost like a trip to Bank of America. And
Okay.
what you put in is what you're going to get out. And I believe that what you had in your relationship going into COVID-19 is what is going to sustain you or what's going to come out during COVID-19. So if
Yeah.
you already had issues with communication, COVID-19 is not going to uh, necessarily help those issues with communication unless you're making a conscious decision to say we have an issue with communication, and whether it be COVID-19 or not, we're just going to make an intentional effort to work on our issues of communication, right?
Yeah.
Um, or that I have an issue that I have anxiety that I just been ignoring, right?
Yeah.
As we use as the example from earlier, that if a woman has a lump, they're going to want to go and get that lump checked
Yeah.
out. And so we've been ignoring some warning signs that says that we have some unresolved issues that could affect our mental health that we have been ignoring all along. And now that we're in the middle of a crisis, now we're manic because we have not done anything to manage or cope with those mental health issues, right?
Yeah.
Now accessing some of those services could be difficult because we're sheltering in place, or because we have to deal with the complexity of confounding variables that we may not have had to deal with in a traditional counseling or environment. Our worlds are colliding for many persons like myself. We're trying to be professional. I'm trying to be professional, pastor, parent, all in the same space. And that's
Yeah. Yeah.
easily done or managed. And so I think that really understanding that where your relationship needed work prior to going into COVID, and making an intentional effort that during COVID, while you do have some unbarriered walls, to try to do some of that work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know that I had to revisit therapy myself. I mean, I am an avid supporter of therapy. We've talked about it in my conversations with you, again, because Kazan is my cousin. So, like, we have those conversations on how to develop, and we try to do that whole mentality of iron sharpened, right?
Yeah, the only thing that I want the audience to know is that he is older than me, and I wish that he wasn't my cousin, because he does have a therapist who gets paid a lot of money. So unfortunately, it is too much of a conflict of interest, and because all the bad things that I ever did in my life, he taught me how to do them.
Oh, here we go. Are you really gonna do this?
For me to be I mean, and I think that that's such a major thing, and I have to continue to applaud you both publicly and privately, even for being as honest and real with your listening audience, because hearing you talk so freely about receiving therapy is really helpful to other people. Because when we look at therapy, the ideal or the image is supposed to be somebody who is just like, totally frailed and disgruntled.
Yeah.
We look at polished professionals who are successful as people who would need therapy. And so your continued reality or realness, because I hate transparency, but your continued openness is really what's helping your listening audience, and anybody who listens to this. It's like, wow, if Alex can do it, then I can do it.
Well, I mean, I would say this. I mean, what it has done for me is that I've surrounded myself with people who have real conversations with me, right? Where they're like, okay, look, we recognize that, there may be this thing that's happening or this things that happening. These things are hard to cope with. You should check in with a professional. But I mean, therapy started for me a couple years ago. Like, I just literally collapsed. And I woke up and I was in the emergency. I mean, I was in the ICU for a second because they didn't know what was going on. And so they sent me to therapy after the collapse. And I had such an amazing time in therapy and was able to work through so many issues that it was something that I decided to continue doing. It's always good to have somebody who is unbiased. I mean, I know, like you said, I had a number of pastor friends. I have a number of church friends. I have a number of people with a lot of advanced degrees. And, honestly, they all are my friends, and they may have their own biases, or they may have their own desires, or things for my life. And so to be able to pay somebody who has no connection to your life but to help your mental health, I think that that's a really good focus to have, or a good person to have, where you can bounce that type of information off of. But I want to get it off of me. I will say this to the listening audience: if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them inside the comment section, and we'll go ahead to ask while we're having this conversation. This is a time where, we would like to hear from you. This is my first time doing this, and it was great that my cousin, Pastor Zaniel Young, decided to come on here. I wanted to make sure that I had somebody that was a professional. I would love for you guys to go ahead and ask any questions that you may have. I will also say that you can check Wesley AME Zion Church out in New Jersey. They have a website, WesleyAMEZNJ.com. You can go out and check out the church, maybe catch some of his Zooms that he has with his church, and they did a great revival, I know, and they're just doing some really cool things. I shared something that he did, the parade that he did at his church, just to kind of see what the church is doing to try to adjust to this virus. And so, I think this is times where we need to be thankful about what we have, and also do our best to help other people who may not have as much as us. These are the times that kind of brings us closer together, not only as a country, but in communities. And we really should use this opportunity to definitely get closer to people that we may have lost connection with. It looks like we got a question. How do you suggest we get family members involved in therapy, group or individual, or family has been through so many traumatic things, but I don't think they're feeling therapy? So, well then, Zan, again, how do you convince family member? This came from Chantrice Martin, who is an amazing advocate. We did great work together in Washington, D.C. So thank you for asking that question, Chantrice. So Zan, do you see the question? I'm not sure. Can you see it?
I don't see the question.
But ask your question again?
Oh no, I hear the question. That's a wonderful question. Because I am a preacher, I have to infuse a little. Oh yes, I see the question. Thank you, Miss Martin. I have to infuse a little bit of preachiness on it. But when I think about it, the question, I think about Samuel D. Proctor in The Imposing Preacher, right? Talks about Black Christian vision for transforming the American public space. And so in order for us to do that, we have to have an active role in maintaining mental health in its totality. That involves family. And to me, the most practical way to engage a family in therapy is most times it starts with one individual, right? An action here causes a reaction somewhere else. So, and as you know from personal experience, Alex, is that if you go to therapy, you're already breaking a stigma and a barrier, and then you are able to share that experience with someone else in your family or in your group, your circle, your cluster of loved ones that might in some way encourage them to be more accepting towards it, right?
Yeah.
And really the way that we as millennials and the way that we're really going to understand our genetic makeup and why we have these mental health issues is if we involve our families and if we have these difficult conversations that we've been suppressing from generation to generation. That's the only way that you and I, our children's children will be free, is if we really have these conversations about the undiagnosed issues that our ancestors, our parents' parents have lived through and have not addressed and have only passed on to us from generation. And that genetic makeup, that trace is still in our genetic makeup.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I have a question. And I know this is probably going to be kind of off the hip, but I know, and I'm always going to bring it back politically. I know that they have given out a lot of programs to help the churches. I know that the Paycheck Protection Act, I think it was like PPP, came out, and churches could actually apply for those grants. Grants were loans turned grants. Let me just ask, do you feel like the government could do more? And what do you think the government can do more to support the church?
I have a really different viewpoint. And it may get me into a little bit of trouble.
Okay.
Um, but because you told me that you facilitated a show that could be somewhat troublesome or edgy, right?
Yes.
I may be able to employ some of my facetiousness in this dialogue.
Okay. Well, go
But
ahead.
I feel like this.
Say.
I'm appreciative that Black churches, particularly, are being looked at or being even considered through PPPs or other type of resources that are available to them to sustain. And let me
Yes.
just also put the disclaimer that I feel like this is not what I'm going to say is not related to Black-owned businesses or small businesses that have benefited from the paycheck protection plan or any other resources or stimulus packages as it relates particularly to the church. Prior to COVID-19, right? Follow me.
Mm-hmm.
The government was not assisting us in staying open. The government was not assisting us in paying salaries for our members, for our employees, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that was being done in most cases solely by the taxing or by the giving of the membership.
Mm-hmm.
We call it tithes and offering, right? We learned that we live by it. And so if you're a part of a ministry, you pay your tithes and offering. So the tithes and offering is what generates the church's income that helps you to float the overhead costs of the church. Right? You following me?
Yes.
So if the membership, hear me, is tithing, tithing doesn't necessitate your presence. It necessitates your action. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that we used it as another excuse to not hold the body of Christ accountable for a kingdom action, which is tithing, that 10%, right? And then we've used it to only continue to get further into to spend more, because in some cases we're getting further into debt because we have not done a good job at maintaining the debt that we have, or
Mm-hmm.
being good stewards over the finances that we have. Letting alone opening up another floodgate of finances and to another stream of money that we could potentially have to pay back if we're not careful or we don't have good bookkeepers, because we also don't employ the best professionals to do the job. But in the Black church, particularly, is another place that you can just get away with Mama, with Auntie Joe or Miss Green, who've been a member of the church for 30 years, who keeps the books. And so we don't employ the professional help, the professionals that we need. So that's my skill on that, and I hope that that answers your question. So I have a skewed viewpoint on the PPP or any other stimulus package that has come out, particularly for the church.
Okay. So we are about to add another person to the stream.
Okay.
And we are talking about, right now, we are talking about how the government has helped the communities and if they are doing enough. My good friend, John King, is on with us, and he is a political leader in South Carolina. Would you introduce yourself, or you want me to just give a couple of details for you, John?
Sure, you can do it.
Okay. Well, this is State Representative John King, one of my really good friends out of the state of South Carolina. I was privileged to actually go to a press conference that he had, and they were talking about a lot of issues that were happening in the African American community. I found it to be quite interesting that they did the stuff that they had found when they were talking about the issues that they were going through. And so I know also today, State Rep John was a part of a group of legislators that had a conversation about the young man that just got murdered by two, what was it? They were community, they tried to do a community arrest of a guy who was running, and they killed him. And so he was there standing out, protesting, speaking out against that. So it's my great pleasure to have him on with us. And Good friend of mine. So, John, we were asking, we were talking about how the government is supporting the church, but I guess you can talk about the church and local businesses and how you think the federal government has done so far.
Well, I don't know about what is happening in communities other than what is happening here in South Carolina when it comes to churches. I think the process has not been, um, I guess, there hasn't been an educational component for churches. So many of them are finding it difficult to access the PPP money or the grant that they are now given to small businesses as well as to churches. And I think that we as elected officials, more importantly, federal elected officials, have an obligation to educate their state and their community in reference to churches and small business on how to access the money, but how to make that money truly a grant, because a lot of people don't realize what they have to do once they have received the funds, and what percentage has to go for salaries, and what the money can actually use for. So what you're going to see in months to come or years to come is a lot of people who were not educated on the funds and how they're supposed to be spent and the percentages that are supposed to be spent. They're going to have to pay that money back, but they're still under the impression that it's a grant, but they were not educated on how to use the funds and what percentages they needed to use. So I'm finding that we're having to educate people, telling them how many days they have to spend the money and what time frame they have to spend it in order for it to turn from being a loan to actual a grant. And so some people access the the original grant where they will give you up to $1,000 per employee, up to 10,000. That is a grant that you don't have to pay back. But anything beyond that you go and get the loan for, those funds have to be expended in a certain amount of time. The other thing that we are dealing with in South Carolina in our General Assembly is where the governor thought that he would be responsible for the $3.4 billion that comes to South Carolina. We're a small state. And he thought that he solely had that. So we did some legislation today that will then put it in the hands of the General Assembly. The 124 House members and the 46 senators will now decide where those funds go. And I think the Zoom conference call that you were on, we were not aware that we would go in session today and take that out of his hands and actually put it in the hands of the General Assembly. So what you're finding now is that we will be in control of those funds. I think you may have heard us say that the funds will be solely assigned by the governor.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, let me just kind of tell you what's happening, Rep King. So we kind of opened the floor up to the Facebook followers that are like watching us. And so there was a question that just came in. And actually, I'm going to put it up on the screen. And Zan, you can go ahead and answer the question. And then actually, if you want to tag in and jump in and see where you can kind of fit in where the question is still okay. Representative King? You heard what I'm saying? I said so. Okay, so the question that they had was to Pastor Zan. It says, when it comes to the cooperative economics and therapy during COVID, does your church offer group therapy or counseling? Has it been impactful for members? How can we replicate that outside of the church? And so what I'll do is this. I'll let Zaniel kind of think about that. And then I'll also tell you, Representative King, so let me move this right there. Okay. So how do you think, and how are you guys thinking about mental health in the state of South Carolina as you guys are moving through your legislation of trying to make sure people stay financially whole? How are you guys working towards helping them stay mentally whole? All right, so I'm going to let you let that simmer with it. I mean, however you two want to take the question, you guys can go ahead and answer whoever wants to go first.
It doesn't matter to me. South Carolina, that has been a conversation in reference to mental illness and the impact that COVID-19 will have, not only just on one segment of the community, but you're going to see all age groups suffer from mental illness. in some way, shape, form, or fashion. But I think who we need to focus on a whole lot, in my opinion, um, is our younger generation. Many are being affected. I've seen here in South Carolina where kids are contemplating suicide
Mhm.
from the confinement, from not being able to. You have students that I think you were on our Zoom call the other day, where we had a student here in South Carolina who tried to commit suicide because this particular student was an A honor roll student, could not access the internet and keep up with his schoolwork.
Mhm.
So he was falling behind, and he felt that he was a failure, um, and tried to commit suicide. I think that highlights how important we, as elected officials across the country, are going to have to look at mental illness, and how it has impacted, our school age students as well as other folk that are impacted. You're going to find that people who are losing their businesses, who are getting into financial trouble,
Mhm.
will have, go through a go through something in their life that they could also be contemplating mental illness. I think we're going to have hotlines throughout, and this is something that we're doing in South Carolina, is we're creating hotlines for people to talk, to vent, but more importantly, to receive information on how they can access anything that's dealing with COVID-19, from mental health to telemedicine to accessing food, because we have a lot of food deserts here in South Carolina,
Yeah.
um, as well as healthcare. And so, what we are now opening up is testing sites in South Carolina. We are always last to do a lot of things, but we are now testing in some places up to about 1,000 people a day at
Oh
just
wow.
one site. So we are trying to do a better job at that. So there's a lot that is going to be going on, and it all turns around to making sure that people are mentally stable after all of this.
Okay. All right. Pastor Young.
Yes, so let me just first say good evening to Representative King. It's good to see you. I know it's been a while since I've been down in the Palmetto State since COVID-19. Although you represent Representative King represents a different area of South Carolina from me. He's there in Rock Hill area, and I'm Columbia all day. So I do agree with some of the things that he said. But as we talked prior to Representative King coming on, I am a strong advocate for mental health as it relates to Black mental health, as it relates to our community of African Americans. And so I think that mental health and the effects of COVID-19 will have a greater impact on the African American community as it will for those who are of other cultural descent. I do agree with the point that he made that there will be a tremendous spurge in mental health services post COVID-19. We've
Yes.
already seen an increase in those mental health services currently through COVID-19, as we talked a little bit earlier about some of the increased anxiety, the lack of being able to access the coping mechanisms outside of the home, the collision of all those barriers being secluded to sheltering in place at home has already increased some persons and put them in a manic state. I open enough earlier to share my own mental health that is being maintained by increased level of therapy because of the colliding of all of my world. So that certainly is having an impact on a lot of people, but it's going to affect African Americans greater than it is any other culture that there is. And to answer Mrs. Martin's question, because she is working me over tonight. Um, I don't particularly offer counseling for my individual congregation because for me, it would be what I would consider and my profession would consider a conflict of interest. However, we do have some behavioral strategies that we employ that help us manage people's mental health, and specifically during COVID-19. We've tried to be intentional in some practical ways, like staying connected, having routine calls and designated persons to call to check on people. Some of the practical ways that I tell my congregation or teach them is to listen to understand, not just to hear. So ask people how they're doing, but really listen to how they're doing and to follow up and follow through with them. So we don't have any formal group therapy system, Miss Martin, but I think that every time we come together on a Zoom call, whether it's for a church leadership meeting, whether it's for morning worship, it is a small group session because I always have an opportunity to pulse check with the membership and or with the leaders to see how everyone is doing. And so I believe that that can also be replicated outside of the church in small groups. We can have accountability partners like Alex and I, and or you know, having a group of friends that decides that on Tuesdays we're gonna all call and check on one another. On Wednesdays we're gonna send an email or a text. So there's different ways and opportunities to support persons in and through, but most of all after COVID-19. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So again, I mean, like you guys could definitely check in and see, shoot your questions in. I'm going to kind of talk. I'm gonna, and then this is probably going to be a conversation. So uh, for Rep King, like if you don't want to answer the question, I completely understand. But I'm sure you're a professional and you can just dodge around what you don't necessarily. You're a professional with this. But let's talk about the election, right? So we are in a primary election year. How are the both of you guys making sure we're presidential election primaries right now. So how are you making sure that the people that won in your church are staying involved and how they participate? And the same thing for you, Rep King. Like, what are you doing to get people ready to get out to these polls in this time? And like, what strategies are you guys using to make sure that the voting actually happens? I mean, it's a very important election that we are going into. I mean, we definitely want to get Donald Trump out the White House. And so, like, what are you doing to make sure that the people in the church are staying aware of what's happening, that they're getting their mail-in ballots done, everything like that? Are they allowed to do mail-in ballots where you are? And how are you helping facilitate this process and make sure that we get as many votes out during this election season?
Here in South Carolina, we are a absentee ballot voting state, which means we do not have what you call early voting. We do not have early voting here in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. But today we met in session at the state capitol, and what we did is we put another category on the reasons why you can have an absentee voting, and it is for no reason. Meaning you can, because of us being in a pandemic, they can get an absentee ballot for whatever reason. It doesn't have to be a reason at all now. And so what people will be able to do is call in. In South Carolina, it can be a little difficult because what you have to do is call in. Once you call in, they mail you an application. You fill the application out, you send it back in, and then they send you your ballot. Or you can go to our county voter registration office in any of the counties here in South Carolina. You can walk in, fill out the application that day, and vote. What we have done also in South Carolina is we have allocated about $15 million to increase visibility or education on voting, as well as to hire more people. As you know, I'm not sure what it is in New Jersey and Philadelphia, but in South Carolina, most of our polling places are manned by our elder citizens or older citizens. So what we're finding is that they're not wanting to work. And we have our primaries here on June the 9th. So now we're struggling because what you will find is in heavily African-American communities is that they're going to start consolidating precincts, which is a disadvantage for many of our people because they will not have transportation to get to the polls. Most of our precincts are within walking distance of your home. But if they consolidate them because they do not have the number of people to man those polls, then what we're having to do is try to get into the Black churches so that they can educate their people, so that we can get volunteers to make sure that people are voting early, as well as we're taking people to the polls. So that is the challenge that we have here in South Carolina. I believe that will be the challenge throughout the country because I'm assuming that most of the polling places across the country are being ran by older citizens of our communities, which means those are the ones that are most vulnerable to the virus, and they are skeptical about going out. So now you're having these precincts without people being able to find folk to work. There's a lot of innovative things that we're going to have to do. We know that. But you have to understand South Carolina is a Republican ran state. While we as Democrats here in South Carolina believe that there should be no barriers for people to vote, that is not true of the Republicans here. So we are fighting every day as Democrats to make sure that people just have their basic right to vote. We don't care if you register the day of the election, but in South Carolina you have to register 30 days. So we're fighting a battle down here that may not be something that you all have to fight in Philadelphia or New Jersey. But we look for suggestions as to how we can do things better here.
All right. Pastor Zan.
Sorry for talking so much.
No worries.
Well, I would say that for New Jersey also early voting is not available, and in-person absentee voting is not available as well. And I think that I would have to partially agree again with Representative King that we're going to have to employ some creative ways, but some really intentional ways to make sure that the constituents of our respective communities across the country are getting out to get to vote. So our efforts already had to be at 100% prior to COVID-19, right? We were already dealing with several confounding variables that would prohibit or block people from having a successful voting experience, right? More importantly, with our intention to vacate the seat that's currently being occupied in the White House. And so now we have to work on overdrive to make sure that our congregation can meet, that my congregation and the community of people that I represent is informed about what their voting options are, and how to complete those actions even during or after the COVID-19 crisis. Because the primary begins July 7th. We're talking about another extension of COVID-19, and we're already in May. So what will July 7th look like for us, right? So how will that impact our ability to be involved in the early voting? So we're going to have to really press the pavement, and really even do more virtual connections like this, to be able to connect with people in a practical way, to work through some of those practicalities or some of those technicalities that are going to really be a barrier. And I think that we have to really do a good job at educating, because I think that as a preacher, I have to infuse the spiritual part of it. But a part of my political viewpoint also is connected to my spiritual viewpoint, right? And so I believe that spiritually, that the church would say we're being distracted by COVID-19, and in some ways, I would agree that that doesn't just apply for the church, but also in the world, that we're being distracted from COVID-19, and that we're getting, or that he's offered a stimulus package to persons or to families. $1,200 will not buy them a vote, right? And families are still suffering. That $1,200 was enough to make ends meet for 1 week in most households, and not even in many households. And people are still unemployed. The unemployment rate is still rising. The access to unemployment rate, to unemployment resources, is still very difficult because the overwhelming demand that they're not able to meet. So we need to be clear and not distracted that our current administration is really not doing things that really impact us. And so we have to make sure that they're not distracted by the promise of $1 that came now or that is to come, because that is not going to sustain them after COVID-19. Because let me tell you, your bills are still going to be due. The bill collectors are still, they too are depressed, because they're losing they're losing income. Think about the network of some of our agents, some of our corporations, and you and I have talked at nauseam about the fall of the stock market, and so businesses are suffering. And so that's why I semi-agree with Representative King, because I think that the impact that the stimulus package has had on small businesses is significant and reputable. But as far as churches, not so much.
Okay. So again, guys, I just want to tell you that this is Pastor Young and Representative John King. And we are just here just having kind of like a chat, just talking about some things on politics in church and mental health. If you guys have any questions about anything that we've been talking about, feel free to go in the comments section and share your question. And we will be more than happy to answer whatever question that you may have, the best of our ability. I just think these conversations are important, especially when you're talking about this pandemic. And I just want to ask you one final question because we left. What do you think the world is going to look like after this? I guess, what do you foresee? How do you think this is going to change our world? What is going to be our new normal? What do you see our new normal is as a country, and what do you see your new normal is as an individual? I mean, me personally, I know that I'm probably going to, I made a deeper connections with a lot of people in my spaces. So I know that what I'm going to do is try to maintain those connections. I mean, of course, me trying to work on myself as far as my mental health is concerned. So I've made sure that I've, gotten to a good therapist to kind of do my home workouts and make sure that I do a lot of virtual happy hours connected. I mean, I think that my home was a lot more comfortable. I mean, I was barely here that often. And so now I'm here so often. I've done a lot of projects and done a lot of things in my house. As far as people are concerned, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I'm going to want to go out as much as I used to. I mean, that could be for two reasons. It could be age, because I'm almost 40 now, or it could be, maybe I've become more comfortable with being by myself. So I'm just curious, how do you think your new normal, what do you think your new normal is going to be? And how do you think the new normal is going to affect the country and the communities that you serve?
Me or you? I can. Who you going with?
Representative King, because he's going to have profound statements, and and I need to saturate the ground with the spiritual talk before the political talk, and so let me saturate the ground. But I honestly believe, first of all, that we would have had to define what normal was prior to COVID-19. And so our Kierkegaard and Plato are German philosophers, and Kierkegaard and Plato say, what is beauty? And that we can't recognize what beauty is unless we understand what ugly is. But then what is ugly, right? So I truly believe that that there has to have been somewhat of a definition of what normal was before COVID-19. And was that really normal, or was that managed? I think if nothing more, we will have a more fluid definition of what normal is. Because of COVID-19 and because of the embracing of newfound opportunities and hobbies, skills, connections with people, we're going to be able to define a more fluid version of what normal is. And normal to you will not be normal to me, but it'll be my normal, right? So I think we'll be able to have more individualized spaces, and spaces that more closely represent who we truly are as individuals, and not who we've masked to be, trying to live up to a fabricated normal that was really never defined. Representative, I was going to say Senator Ford, but I forgot she's not on this call. So,
well, let me say this to you, and I appreciate that, Pastor, in reference to your definition of what is normal. And prior to this, how do we even define what normal is? But I will say, and I'm going to take it from a different standpoint as to, I hope our new normal is that we respect people. I hope our new normal is that we honor the circle of folk that are around us, cultivate our relationships that we have, because it shows you, as a person, you're a minister, I'm a mortician by trade, that life is to be valued. And at the blink of an eye, our whole life can change. But more importantly, I hope that our new normal is respect. Respect for people who have kept this country going. And those are people who when I say we, I'm not talking about the three of us or the people who are on this call. I'm talking about people who don't always look at the other person as an equal or a person of value. People such as the folk that work in the grocery stores, um, who are there every day for low wages, but then go home. They make sure that we're fed. They leave and go home, and they can potentially infect their families. But they're doing this to keep America going, but also to make sure that they have food on their tables. A lot of people didn't realize this, that while a lot of people were unemployed, they were the ones working, not getting that extra $600 for unemployment, which would have probably more than what they're making a week. So I hope in general that our new norm is appreciating people, appreciating those folks who are not always appreciated. And I think that we as a community have to embrace um, an effort in our community to make sure that, let me say this, just like the young man was killed down our thing is we can sit and
King, are you still there with us? Hello? Oh, well, I think he may have gotten cut off. Well, Pastor Young, are you still there?
I'm still here. Yes.
Oh no, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties here. But anyway, yeah, I can definitely hear what he was saying. I mean, I think respect is something that we definitely want to have moving forward. And so, like, what I will do is try to make sure, well, one, we're going to try to work out those technical difficulties with John. And when he gets that together, we'll bring him back on. Oh, I think he.
I think that we're waiting. Oh,
Okay. I'm sorry.
I can hear you.
Well, you're very, very low.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. I can hear you a little bit better now.
Okay, wonderful. No, I was just saying, and I'm gonna be very short because I think you heard pretty much what I'm saying. I just think that our new norm has to be respect. Our new norm has to be the embracing of love, to appreciate and thank people who are not always appreciated and given those thanks that they deserve. When I walk in the grocery stores, or if I go in the gas station, or anywhere, I thank those people. And my plan as a legislator is to fight like hell for us to increase minimum wage, at least here in South Carolina, to ensure that those people have a livable wage. It is, mind-boggling to me, and I don't even understand how they can live off of minimum wage. So I think we have to do more for people that are often forgotten. And I think our new norm has to be appreciate those folks.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, especially, I mean, this seems to take a lot of seniors. I think 2/3 of the people who have passed in this country were elders. And so it's just like, we got to make sure that we appreciate them and love them, and make sure that we're looking out and taking care of them as we wear our masks, and make sure we remain vigilant when we get around them. I just want to thank you guys so much for allowing me to use this and try this new technology out with you guys on my page. I mean, this may be something that I might try to do, and I pick another topic. You guys have been absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for being with me on my first live stream with Talks with Alex. And so, any last words that you want to leave? You want shout outs, fundraising? Is there something that you want people to know when your next event is, or how they can contact you? I know that Pastor Young is going to be doing his CCC, and so I mean he can kind of tell you about that as we close out. And you can. I'm not sure which one wants to go first on what they want to make sure that people know about them as we end this conversation. And I guess you can go first, Pastor Young.
Again, Alex, thank you so much for including me and even considering me to be a voice of reason, even though I'm your annoying little cousin. I appreciate you respecting my professionalism, but also having an active role in allowing me to have a voice in something that I'm so passionate about. And thank you for sliding that in. We are working out the details with our partners for the vision and soon to release more information to the world. Of course, you've had an opportunity to see some behind the scenes clippings of it, but we are soon to release CCC, which is Clergy Conversations from the Couch. We'll have an opportunity to look at some psychotherapy from the couch with clergy on conversations as it relates to mental health, managing and dispelling those myths surrounded around mental health, and just really helping us to break the silence, embrace our truth, and journey from exclusion to inclusion, from isolation to intentional action, and of course, from silence to strength. So thank you again for the opportunity to share. And I look forward to seeing you soon, Representative King. When this is over, I'll be down 77 at I-20 and look to share lunch with you as we work towards more work for the kingdom in the future.
And so how can people connect with your church if they want to donate?
Awesome.
How can people support the efforts that you're doing?
Thank you so much for that opportunity because, I am a preacher, so this would be offering time, right? So folks can still connect with our church. That is the Wesley Amy Zion Church, or the Wesley Church, located at 204 Sunset Road in the city of Burlington, New Jersey, 08016. Of course, you can visit us on the World Wide Web at www.wesleyamyzionchurch.org. Visit us on social media through Facebook at Wesley Amy Zion Church. You can connect with us financially through Givelify. You can find Wesley Amy Zion Church tap to give, and of course, you can bless the pastor through Cash App at Young2013.
Okay. Representative King.
Oh, well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity just to be in the presence of Pastor Zan. But no, I really have enjoyed the little portion that I could add to this conversation. I hope that I will be allowed to come back on and update us as we deal with the COVID-19 and how it will affect our community, and especially the African American community and the conversations. I think that this will grow into something a lot larger than what you think it is. I think that we have to continue to educate our community about everything. So I'm excited about what you're doing and what this is about to do for not only your community, but the entire community as a whole. But people are welcome to email me. I'm always open to hearing what you all are doing, what concerns there are, because what you may not know is that if legislation is introduced in South Carolina, trust and believe other states are looking at what other states are doing. And if we do it right here, or if you all do it right there, those are things that you will see transpire throughout the country. And so I say that to say, even though I may not represent you, I do represent you as a Black man, as a Black elected official. So feel free to reach out. My name is John R. King at South Carolina House. My email is johnking@schouse.gov. John, John, King, King at schouse.gov.
Okay. All right. So
King, I'm looking forward to strong legislation in South Carolina. My mother still lives in South Carolina, so I'm holding you to that, as she is one of the recipients of that legislation. So please advocate, work hard, because my mother is affected by the work that you do.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. I mean, this is very interesting. These are not only professionals; they are my good friends. And so, like I said before, it's a pleasure. I'm Alex Deering out of Philadelphia. This is Pastor Young out of New Jersey, and Representative John King out of South Carolina. Thank you guys so much for coming to the broadcast. And I really do appreciate you guys for all the for looking in, and for those who stayed on the whole time. I thank everybody for asking their questions. This is something that I think I may start doing This is something that I wanted to try out, but I think this is good. I think it'll be good to get information on the people and in the small way that I can. All right. So you guys, hopefully we'll be doing this again next week. Look out. I'm gonna post on social media the next time I'm gonna do it, what time, so you guys can actually plan for it. And thank you so much for staying with me. And I will catch up with you soon.